Good evening, folks. Welcome to Leathermen's discussion group. We're really happy that you're here. We have a great program tonight. Is this anyone's first time at LDG? No? Oh, welcome. Kind of like an AA meeting.
It's my first time too.
Oh yeah. Welcome. So just a couple of housekeeping. Silence your phones. Tonight's program is going to be live streamed and then uploaded to YouTube, so you can watch it or refer your friends to it later. Bathrooms are on the way in, and my name is Al Ram Lujan. I'm the chair of LDG, and I welcome you. I'm going to turn it over to our wonderful program director to tell you about tonight's program.
Thank you very much, Al. Do I need to wait? Okay. Some of you guys who are way over there in the wings, feel free to move this way, even back this way, so we're talking to people a little bit more.
And y'all, give it up for your
but also, I want everyone on their feet anyway, because I want to do a quick straw poll of who's in the room and who knows anything at all about body. So everybody stand up, regardless of whether or not you're going to move. And so sit down if you've ever been to body storytelling. Okay, so that's a few of you. Yes, you count. You've been on the bloody stage. Now, sit down if, other than for the purposes of tonight, you've heard of body storytelling. If you only heard of it for tonight, stay standing. Okay, so there's a good bunch of you never even heard about this, right?
meat.
I am delighted everyone can sit down now. The fact that you can all drag yourselves out on a wet Wednesday evening is great, because it means you can also drag yourself out on a wet Thursday evening once a month to go and see body stories. It is far more entertaining than this, and you will thank me afterwards when you've been. We are super lucky. It's often said, or I often hear it said, that San Francisco has somewhat lost its artistic heart to the tech boom and hipsters and all that kind of stuff. But Dixie here keeps that heart beating alive and well at Bawdy Stories every month. So treat yourself, get down there, in fact get up there, get on stage and tell your story. Obviously you still don't really know what I'm talking about yet, because you've just heard about it. So we're going to talk to Dixie this evening, find out a lot more about body storytelling, where it came from, why she does it, why she loves it so much, and then after the break, we're going to have a guest storyteller who we're hoping we're going to have a little bit more coached to tell the story. He's very bravely volunteered to tell his story with not quite as much coaching as we were planning on giving him, and then we're going to do some live coaching, which means you guys get to see what it's like, a little bit of what it's like when when Dixie helps people prepare their stories for the stage at Bawdy Storytelling. So I would like you all, because I am so fucking excited and honoured to have Dixie. She's a local legend. You just don't know it. Give a huge round of applause.
Hi, y'all.
Hi.
I don't know what this mic is going to do in this dungeon, so we're all going to find out. If I'm loud, I'll just go, shut the fuck up.
So, how you doing?
Good.
Good.
I'm excited to be here. The last time I was here, I borrowed a throne for Ethical Slut author Dossie Easton's story roast that we threw about a month ago.
Sounds right.
So
Nice.
I snuck in when nobody was here. This is the first time I've been in here when there are people in here.
So tell us, in whichever order makes most sense to you, a bit about yourself and a bit about Bawdy Storytelling.
So I grew up in the Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia to a bunch of rednecks who would tell me that queer people were evil and that sex was a sin and you save it for marriage. And that didn't make a whole lot of sense. When they first told me the facts of life, my mom was so stressed out about it, I got up and I threw up in the middle because she was so stressed out. And then afterwards I went, she's that stressed out, there's got to be something there. So I started sneaking out. Do y'all remember the quarter loops? Remember the quarter loops? It's where you used to, and then quickly became the sex ed program at my school for the cheerleaders. And how do you do it? I'm like, actually, you suck. You do not blow. It's very confusing. And, you know, in the South, sex toys are illegal. Everything was illegal. I wanted to go to a place where, you know, everything was invented. So eventually I moved to San Francisco. One of the first things I did here was my friend said, we're going to take this really cool street fair. You're going to like it. What is it? We're not going to tell you. And I'm standing on the corner waiting for the light to change. It goes green. And chaps and asses pass me. And I'm like, oh, I love San Francisco. So I moved to San Francisco pretty soon, got invited to sex parties, started looking for myself, trying to figure out who the hell I was, which is kind of why you moved to San Francisco, to figure out who the fuck you are. And started going to BDSM events, and started going to swinger parties, and started going to costumed polyamorous events, and went down every little rabbit hole I could find, and met a lot of people and heard a lot of really cool stories as I looked for myself. And then one day, somebody said, come hear me tell a story at this little storytelling event. I'd never had any idea what a storytelling event was. I thought it was that lady at the library who likes to dress up like a Native American, and I'm like, I'm not going to like that. But I went. There was people telling stories about doing drugs at Burning Man, and it was, you know, everybody having experiences at Burning Man that were completely different, all talking about the same event, their own personal experience with something, and I was like, this is really cool, but perverts could kick this shit up and down the street. And not long after that, even though I had a terrible fear of public speaking, I invited a bunch of people to get together, and I said, we're going to get together, we're going to tell our stories about sex, kink, gender. And they went, great, and where will we fuck? And I said, this is going to be a storytelling event, we're not going to fuck. And they're like, that's the stupidest thing I've ever done. But at the end of the night, they went, this is really cool. And I've been doing it for like 12 years now. So, monthly in San Francisco and in Seattle. And I tour from time to time. And I'm getting ready to probably do a tour to Chicago or this summer.
What are you going on NPR?
NPR? They don't want me on NPR.
So give people a rough outline of what a body storytelling show looks like.
Okay, so we do it here in town at the Verdi Club, which is an Italian-American dinner club that we've got set up like audience style, auditorium style. Usually get like 300 people in the room. And we have custom songs that are written for each show. So we will have a song about fisting, or a song about puppy play, or a song about polyamory. And it ties into the theme of the evening. Each show has a theme, and people will sit in the audience. And if we're near the front door, or if I see the new people who are coming in, sometimes it's as many as 95% brand new people. Like, I don't know who the fuck's telling, but it's clearly not Fight Club because it's not working. We don't advertise, we don't do anything, but it still ends up being full. And people come in and they go, and I go, so you think you ever tell a story here? And they're like, oh no, a story about sex? I never tell a story about sex. By the end of the night, they're like, I can't believe I'm saying this, but I totally want to get up on that stage and tell a story. Because it's life-changing. Like, getting up and talking about who you are and how you found your thing is the most fascinating thing in the world. You have everyone's attention. You can hear a pin drop. You get standing ovations. And everybody has a story. So everybody wants to do it at least once.
Yeah, I can vouch for that. What are the most common misconceptions or misguided expectations those 95% newbies have about the show?
Well, the biggest misconception is that they think it's an orgy. And they come in and they have their shoulders up and they're just looking around, and after a story they go, oh fuck, it's a storytelling event. It's in the fucking name. Orgy. And the other one is they think it's because it's about sex that it's going to be just talentless. They think it's going to be just racing toward an orgasm, then going, and that's what happened, and getting off the stage. And I work with the storytellers, and I coach them, and I like to find out what the story's really about for them. Because, yeah, you do have a story about a gangbang, or you do have a story about the first time you wore a pup, or, you know, the first time you went to Folsom Street Fair and sucked dick, that was a recent story, sucked dick in the middle of the street for the very first time in your life, in the middle of 350,000 people, you know? Like, life-changing stories, but there's so much more there than just the action in the story.
But it's the fact that it is life-changing, right? It's often people overcoming a fear or discovering something they never would have believed they would have loved.
Yeah.
Have you noticed a change in the kinds of stories that people have told over the years?
Do you mean from the very beginning? Or, well, in the beginning it was kind of a unrehearsed, hey, I've got one, and they get up and it was one of those, it was what you would expect in the beginning. It was like race toward the orgasm and they go, so that happened, and you sit back down all awkward like, you should have planned what to say after the climax of the story. So I started coaching people and pulling all that stuff out. The coaching has made a huge difference in the quality of the stories and the length of the stories. There's a lot more to say now when you talk about, you know, everything you care about in that story, rather than, I don't want to bother you guys. I don't really want to bother you with my little story about sex, which is what you do if somebody hasn't given you permission, you know. I'm going to tell a story about this thing, it's important to me, and I feel like I have to explode and tell you this story, versus somebody saying, all right, tell me about that. Tell me about the people. Draw the characters. Make the whole story come to life. What's that story mean? You know, that's telling the storyteller that their story is important, so people own it a lot more than they used to in the beginning.
And I think that touches on something which I don't know whether you take it for granted now, but I think is a vital part of the show and the experience for performance, where in the beginning you coach the audience in how to make that room a super safe, super warm, super welcoming, super fun place to tell a story that, you know, ideally you're going to feel very vulnerable in.
Yeah, a lot of people, we're so used to going to comedy shows and things like that, where somebody gets up and they spill their guts or they tell something really real, and we all go, that was lovely, thank you. You know, you're not going to spill your guts for that person. If the audience is enthusiastic and they're active listeners, like Eric is, where they pay attention and they make eye contact and they look like they're really hanging on the edge of their seat, you're going to give that audience so much more. So I have to beat the audience up.
Yeah.
And that's why I have these.
and remember, you know, picture a very different environment than this, in the sense that it's a full-on stage. So, you know, in a big hall, and Dixie's up there, you know, above everyone, bouncing those things up and down and really getting the crowd going. It's all kinds of fun.
Sometimes nipples fly out and they go, ah! And it's just like, come on. They start screaming because, oh my God, they're going to come flying out at us. You know? But it makes them react.
It really does. It really does. Where do you find your storytellers?
So usually, at every show, I will save the theme for the next show. By the way, next show is going to be on April 18th. The theme is gateway drug. So maybe that's a story about drugs. But probably it's a story about a thing that led you to a thing. You know, how this thing led you to the thing you really care about, or the whole trail, you know. Started with this little thing that led to this life-changing moment. So I will get on stage and I will say, here's the date of our next show. Here's the theme of our next show. Because if you say, tell me a story about sex, people go, and they have nothing. But if you give them a theme, and if you've got a good theme, the audience goes, oh, and you know you got a theme that people have a story for. And then I tell them that they have to send me their stories. And don't write them because I'm Southern and I can't read. I want to hear you tell the story. I want you to use your phone, use a voice memo, record yourself, and then email me that recording. And usually, sometimes they're drunk on their way home from the show, So that's entertaining for me. And sometimes they think on it for a week, and then you get this great story from somebody who's just like, I've never told anybody this. And then they tell me, and I'm like, how fucking awesome is my job? They never told anybody that, and now they want to tell not just me, but 300 people about it. And there's a podcast, and everybody listens to the podcast.
So when you listen to those recordings, I think I remember Bob Hoskins saying that his test for a script was that if his ass got cold on the toilet seat while he was reading it, then it was a good script. Does that make sense?
No, not at all. Wait, is it a heated toilet seat? Because it only lasts for 30 minutes, and if he reads it so long that it turns itself off, and is that
It wasn't a heated toilet seat, but if he becomes conscious that his ass is getting cold because he's been sat there for so long reading the script, then it must be a good bath.
That is fucked up.
Yeah.
I pictured what it's like, you know how somebody cuts out in front of you and you get the cold sweat, you almost were in a car accident? I'm like, is it like that?
No. He's simply there long enough to start feeling a bit chilly.
Okay.
Yeah. Now,
All
I don't imagine it's the same. So is there?
It's not like that at all.
Is there anything that tends to give you a sense? Oh yes, this is going to be a good one.
I really like nerdy stories. So if there's like some super sci-fi element in a personal narrative story, often those will make me sit there and go, what? And I get a lot of stories that make me go, what? Things that if I feel like the audience has the potential to learn something, and in the process I get to be nosy and I get to learn something too. Wait, what's that called? Great, let's teach the world how to get it right. You know, I like stories that are loaded with new information, exposing people to cultures maybe that they judged before. So if it's something that people have gone, oh, that's just weird and distasteful, I totally want to put that on my stage because I want people to understand if you see a person, if you see somebody and hear them talk about how they got there, you're not going to judge it. You're going to go, that was a well-told story. I never thought of it that way. I totally would have done the same thing myself if things had lined up that way. I think that people often go home and go, I've never understood this. And then they walk out the door and go, it all makes so much sense now. And if we don't judge each other, then we start to accept each other. And we become less, if it's something's not foreign anymore, then you can go, got it,
Yeah. Cool. And now that's your kind of litmus test or your personal preference or what really draws you to story.
Yeah.
What would you say are the key ingredients of either great story generally or a great body story?
Great story. What? I was like, what? Somebody over there knows. Key elements of a great story. Willing to be self-deprecating is probably number one. Sometimes people want to go, so I went to this party and I invented every sex act that ever was, and everybody thought I was the best they'd ever had. The end. I'm like, you're not getting on my stage. If you can admit you had no idea what you were doing, you were making it up the whole time, if you were terrified and you're willing to admit what you're terrified of, what you really hoped for, that's the thing people don't put in stories. What's the thing that you really wanted? It's not just this crazy sex experience. It's like, if you could have anything, what would it be? To kiss that beautiful man, to be in the middle of a pile, having hands on me, feeling like I'm the center of attention. We all dream about that moment, but you've got to be brave to admit it and not just make it a crazy sex story.
Do the storytellers' body fit a particular profile?
Only in that they look like regular people. We don't have a lot of superstars on stage. We don't have sometimes people think if they've gone to a sexy event that everybody on stage is going to be like a supermodel or somebody with a 12-pack or something like that. And it tends to be, there are events where you can listen to someone tell someone else's story, but it's so much more powerful to see somebody who looks just like you on stage just going, oh my God, if they can do that, then obviously it's accessible to me too. So I think just seeing regular people admit stuff and talk about things that they don't ever talk about anywhere else, except in this room. Y'all got that covered.
Reasonably well. But as I understand it, you tend to get mostly women.
Yeah.
And of the men, mostly gay men. Is that
Yes,
right?
that is true.
And it's open to everyone.
It is open to everybody. I often have people say, why is there not a queer version of Body? I'm like, Body is everybody. Body is not, and it feels like the world is them versus us, you know? We're the perverts. And they're the people who judge us for being perverts. So we should all band together and put every single experience on stage so that, you know, they have an understanding that it's just regular people who have this exceptional life. And I'm going to tell you about my exceptional life. I think the fact that I don't let people brag about their sex life probably intimidates straight men a little bit. Because I don't have you know, that might be true. I don't know if it's true. But I get very few pitches from straight men. And sometimes the men will come up to me at the show and they go, I have this amazing story, and you know, the character's it's a clearly heterosexual story, and I'm like, you should pitch me that story, because I get very few pitches from heterosexual males, and they're like, what? And I'm like, think about it. Think about the show. A lot of women feel like this is their territory. A lot of gay men feel like this is their territory. And that shifts all the time. Sometimes I will have tons of queer women, and then suddenly it'll be a lot of straight women, and sometimes it'll be a lot of gay men, and then a few straight men will go, oh yeah, I have a story that fits this. It shifts, and I've been doing it for 12 years, so it's shifted a lot of times. But the one thing that I don't get very often is, it used to be true that I didn't get furries, but that's changed in the last year and a half. One of the things that we have to do with the furries is we have to, like, okay, we have to figure out your head garb, so we have to do special miking. So it's kind of like we have to rent special mics and everything like that, so that it doesn't sound cavernous and echoey inside their head or their leather cup mask or things like that.
Fun fact, I think you'll like this. One of the probably about 6 years ago, when I was at IML, I met a furry that was furry head, stormtrooper body.
That's hot.
Yeah.
I know, right?
My favorite thing, if we're going to choose what I like weird. Like, that's weird. Like, you fuck with things, I'm just like, ah. And I mic it for the podcast and everything like that. But I kind of have this thing for a head that echoes. You know, like, my thing is the mall Easter Bunny. Like the chicken wire head that kind of like has a weird echo in it. Something about that echo just totally turns me on. I don't know why. But I'm a good event producer, so I'm like, let's mic that properly. That sounds good.
So you've talked a bit about you want people to be fallible. That wasn't your word, that's mine, but you know. And I happen to know you have a particular love of storytellers who are terrified.
Yeah.
Now, is that from the goodness of your heart you want to take them to a place of getting over their fear, or are you just a sadist?
Yeah. I love watching people be scared. I love watching it. That shit gets real. You can't be fake when you're scared. You can't. You can't be a badass. If you've been coached and you're terrified, you're going to get on stage and we're going to feel the emotion. And we're going to feel like it's palpable. So that's why I coach people. I'm like, I know your story. Your story is amazing. They trust me. They're like, you've been doing this a long time. And if you think my story's good, I'm like, yeah. But my favorite is people who are doing it often for the first time. Because just watching them do this thing that's so scary. I tell people all the time, you're going to go to work and quit your job tomorrow. Because you can do anything after you get on stage and tell a story about sex to hundreds of strangers. You can do anything after that. It really, I get text messages and emails the next day from people who are like, that was fucking life-changing. And it like, I've just submitted to this. I'm going, like, their life changes because they often fall in love with storytelling.
Yeah. Do you feel like you can help anyone knock a story into shape for audio?
As long as you're willing to be coached.
Okay.
There are people
being coachable is.
being coachable. Yeah. It depends on how much time I have, but I believe I can teach pretty much anybody how to do it. There are some people that I work with where each story at Body is true, told not read, related to sex, kink, gender, and body image, and told in about 10 minutes. And a 10-minute story sometimes can take 6, 8, 12 hours of coaching. There are some people who are just naturals. Donald was natural. Donald was
remember the first
That's
time.
true. The first time. The first time. How many hours did we coach the first time?
That was, yeah, and also the final version was a million miles from the first one.
Yeah. Often I have no idea. Like today I was putting a podcast episode up and I started to write a description of the episode, which is only a paragraph. But where we start the story and where we end up when it gets on stage are so, sometimes they're huge difference. I have one story from somebody who messaged me to tell me that she had gone to Body, and by the way, Body gets you laid. That's our reputation. We get everybody laid. If you want to get laid, we're the place.
Just not Apple.
Sometimes at Body. Often in the parking lot on the side street next to Body, but you know, you tend to get laid. I had somebody recently who told a story. She messaged me and said, oh my God, at the show I met this couple, it's crazy. And I ended up getting to fist the woman, and it was loud, and she was just so excited. And I was just like, you want to tell that story, don't you? She goes, yeah, I think I want to get on the stage for the first time and tell that story. And the story ends up, as I ask questions about why that story is so important, like you've done tons of things. Why is this story so important? It ends up becoming that she has a medical condition where anything entering her is physically impossible. So she's blown away that that's even possible. And I'm like, so why don't we go back to the origin story, to how you changed over time. The fisting story never ended up on stage. But the story of why, like her dating and being accepted and feeling othered and suddenly having someone say, I like you just the way you are.
Yeah.
That's not important to me at all. Like, that's when you go. When I listen to stories, the thing that I always listen to a story, and when I feel it here, I'm like, there it is. That's the thing.
Right.
And if somebody just tells this crazy bragging story, and then there's this moment where they go, I knew nobody would ever love me. I'm like, there it is. That's the thing that we all feel.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
That one line, I'm just going, we're not gonna hit it. We're not gonna beat the shit out of it. Just let people know that we all feel that way.
Yeah. And again, on that theme of both vulnerability and enjoying.
Did you bring tissue?
No,
No, it's okay. It's
I know
okay.
there must be some around here. I'm also just checking the time to see where we're okay. So you also do a thing which I understand you did from the very beginning and very nearly stopped doing to help people, especially the first timers, feel safe on the stage.
Remind me of what you're talking about.
So being on the stage with them.
Oh yeah.
Because that wouldn't necessarily be obvious to people.
Yeah. So I sit on the stage through the entire show, and I have a little table and chairs that I'm right next to them. Because when we started at a arts warehouse out in Bayview. And is that for you, or is that in case I cry? Thank you. We started at a Burning Man arts warehouse. It was the only space we could find when we got started. And the only space that they had that even approximated a stage was a stripper pole. So, you know, I mean, there's a tiny, I kept having to stand, like sit in the front row, get up, I'm not in good shape. I'm not built for that shit. So when I got a stage that was big enough, I was like, the stage is big enough where like there's room on it. So I didn't have to get up and down all the time anymore. But that was like the second place we went to. Body has been at like 6, 7 different places.
Okay.
So when we get to like the third one, I'm like, this is great. This place is fantastic. I don't have to sit on the stage anymore. And the storytellers went, no, the deal is you sit beside us. Like, we're not going to be up there alone. You have to be with us. So even though there was, even though things changed over the years, I pretty much had to stay on the stage. They won't let me off the stage. And some other storytelling producers go, she doesn't really sit on the stage though. Like, that's weird. I'm like, some people call it Dixie's living room.
Right.
Like, I found this interesting person, and now they're going to tell you a story. But it is kind of weird to just sit there without making any noise for it. The show is a long show. Like, with a break and games and things like that, it's over 2 hours. So I pretty much just sit there and watch them on stage.
Well, I think you, as well as the feeling of the support of having you there, your reactions are also almost like the audience, laugh now kind of cues. Because often some people, especially with sometimes there's a detail in a story where people don't know, are they supposed to laugh or gasp or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. I've had, over the years, we've had moments where people were coached and I pretty much knew exactly what they were going to say, and then they went off the rails a little bit. And they started doing their own thing, because some people, when they get on stage, are just like, I'm on a stage, motherfucker. Fuck that timekeeper and the rules. And I know she coached me this, but I'm going to do my own thing. And that's when the audience usually comes up to me afterwards and go, I had a bunch of newbies with me, and the newbies were just like this. And one guy, Jason, was just like, stop watching the storyteller, start watching Dixie. Because I'm just sitting there going, oh no, you're not. Like, they can tell by my face. We're off the rails, and Dixie's face is telling us that it's true.
That it's,
I thought so, but she's proving it to us right now.
Yeah. There was a story, I'm terrible with names. One of your favourites, the guy you turned to if there's 2 hours.
Jeffrey Allen Hayes.
And I was there, and he was telling a story that he told before, and then he admitted that in the original version of the story he'd lied about. It was, I think, he said that he'd broken into the church in the original version of the story, in which he then went in and had sex in. But it turns out he admitted in the second telling of the story that he'd lied. He had the key.
Yeah.
And the look on your face. Was
You
that
lied on my stage. So the story was, Jeffrey, this is one of my favorite stories of all time. Jeffrey grew up in Canada, and he grew up to super religious Catholic parents. And he knew that gay sex was a sin, and he felt that he was ugly, that nobody would ever want to have sex with him. So his entire lifetime goal was that he was going to be so good his whole life that he got to go to heaven and meet his grandma Hayes, because he heard she was awesome, but she died before he was born. That was his entire plan for his life, do everything right. And then he meets a man who starts flirting with him on Facebook. And the man is like, you're so handsome. And he's just like, handsome? Who are they talking to? But the man's name was Jesus, and that stood out to him. So Jesus wants to have some alone time with him. And so they get in Jeffrey's mom's van, and they go to the parking lot of the church. And I hope Jeffrey's okay with me telling a story. I think he will be.
He's already on YouTube with it, isn't he?
Yeah. And the only YouTube comments, you know how YouTube commenters are so evil? Yeah. Every comment for Jeffrey Allen Hayes' story is like, he's the most adorable person in the world. Like, I'm constantly getting messages on my YouTube channel where, this man is adorable. This is the most amazing storyteller, the most beautiful man in the world. Only Jeffrey. Everybody else is like, I don't like that. Who gives a fuck what you like? Don't comment on YouTube. It's not important. So he's making out with Jesus in his mom's van in the church parking lot. And Jesus is trying to grab his crotch. And Jeffrey's like, oh, no, I'm never going to do that. That's never going to happen. So we're never going to go there. And Jesus is like, have you ever done anything just because you wanted to? Just because it would feel good? Have you ever thought about doing that? And Jeffrey was like, what? And so Jesus takes him by the hand and leads him into the church. Jeffrey said the door was unlocked, but apparently he had the keys. And they went inside, and they got up on the altar, and they started making out, and clothes are starting to come off, and jeans and belts and everything are being thrown on the floor of the altar. They're making out like crazy. Jeffrey's getting his dick sucked for the first time. And he's got his eyes going back, and he feels somebody take his hand and use one of the belts to tie his hand to the wall. And then they take the other belt and tie his hand to the wall. Now, can you tie hands to a wall? No, he was on the cross getting his dick sucked by his And that's how he lost his virginity. And the first time he told that story from me when we were talking about putting it on stage, I'm like, so what happened afterwards? He goes, Jesus just ghosted me, never called me, never saw him again. He didn't really want anything, he just wanted to do that for me. And I'm like, what happened for you? And he goes, nobody wants to know that. I'm like, everybody wants to know that. And he goes, I was filled with shame. And I didn't have sex for 3 or 4 more years. And then I realized there was nothing wrong with me. That it's not a sin. It's just what I've been told. And it feels, and he works at gay men's sex clubs now. He is like the biggest pervert you ever met, and you could not believe the complete 180 on that life.
Well, I think I've heard you say more than once that he'll actually go out to have sex to generate material for a new story for you on demand.
Because when you have people tell stories about sex on stage, they often get cold feet at the last minute. Like they're like, I thought I could do it, but I can't, so I'm bailing on you. And I'm like, motherfucker. This is like 2 o'clock day of show, and they're supposed to be there at 6:30 for sound check. So I will text Jeffrey Allen Hayes, and I will say, somebody just bailed. He's like, what time is sound check? And he will go out on Grindr or Scruff or something like that, and he will go create a story between 2 o'clock and 6:30. And I never know what he's going to say because it just happened.
So, pretty much all of these stories end up on the podcast?
Not everyone. I mean, there are still people who really don't want their stories out in the world, and we honor that.
Okay.
There are some stories that I'm madly in love with that they're just like, I don't think I'm ever going to have it out there in the world.
Right.
They feel safe in that room sometimes. But that makes me crazy because we live in San Francisco, the most sex positive city in the world. And that's preaching to the choir, I mean, I get letters from people in Des Moines and Florida and people like that who don't have anything like this, who listen to the podcast and go, I can't believe. I make sure that I always include all the huge, crazy applause, the standing ovations, and all that kind of stuff. Because I don't want them to think that we're sitting in a room with a microphone going, I'm going to tell you some secrets, and they're going to put it on a podcast. It's told in front of hundreds of people, and the hundreds of people support you and love you, and I want them to hear the actual experience of being at body.
What kind of, what is that feedback like? What are you hearing from all these places that are not San Francisco?
That they can't believe that a place exists where people talk about these things without hiding themselves. Sometimes it becomes super interactive. I had somebody write me one time who was a gay man who wanted to sleep with a woman, but he didn't know how that worked, and he'd never had anybody who'd slept with a woman. So I called Jeffrey Allen Hayes and went, Jeffrey, have you ever slept with a woman? And he said, give me a minute. And then he got on stage and told the story. And we played it, we recorded it, and we played it for the guy in Florida. And he was like, that was like the most interactive thing ever. Now I know somebody who's done it. Thanks for laying it out. Because stories kind of lay out how it works for you. When somebody goes, I did this, then you're kind of like, oh, now I know how to find a dungeon. Now I know how to find other people like myself, because in the story, part of the coaching is I want you to lay out how you found it to help other people find it. It shouldn't be hidden. It should be something that if you want it, it's there for you.
What's your favorite thing that's I mean, I'm sure you've got, that's a, you know, pick a top 3 that's ever happened on stage before.
On stage.
Yeah.
Sometimes trusted storytellers will surprise me on stage. For example, Jeffrey Allen Hayes told a story about dating somebody who was really into lingerie, and having people from all over the country who was trying to top them send me pictures of you wearing women's lingerie, send me women's lingerie. And he ended up with a box of like 200 pairs of women's panties. And then the person he was,
New?
He didn't say. And the person that he'd been talking with, who'd originally started the conversation about, I'm a gay man who likes to wear women's panties, they'd been just flirting on Scruff. And then they end up in the same town. Scruff says, this person is like 25 feet away from you, when they would originally in somewhere much farther away.
Right.
So they have a couple hours before the plane's going to take off. So they have their first in-person tryst.
Right.
And when they get there, it's like, look, hundreds of pairs of women's panties. And beer his face in it, fucks him. And then at the end of it, the guy says, isn't it strange that you have 200 pairs of women's panties and you're not into women's panties? Maybe you're into women's panties. And then Jeffrey looks at me sideways on stage, because I'm sitting right next to him, and he looks at me like he's scared, and I'm like, oh fuck, what's gonna happen? And he takes off his clothes, and he's wearing tap pants and a camisole. He just strips down to this beautiful little lavender silk number. And I had no idea what was gonna happen, and everybody in the place is screaming like, what just happened? Things like that happen at the show. You don't, like, I think I know what's going to happen because I've coached them and I've planned it, but there's usually something. See, I feel like I'm talking too much about Jeffrey tonight. That was just like I got in that vein.
Well, that was, you know, he sprang to mind, and yeah, I think he's probably...
He'd be happy about this.
Yeah.
We've gotten a lot of people married. We've gotten a lot of people who met the show, who fell in love, and moved in together. We've helped people get jobs. We've helped people get cars.
Have you helped anyone lose a job?
Lose a job. I have helped people lose a job.
Do you remember what job?
There's one story about a stripper who told a story about how she blew somebody in a champagne room, and I think maybe she wasn't as judicious with that story. I shared it on Facebook.
Okay.
I think she got fired.
Okay. Because you don't do that with champagne.
Apparently you're not supposed to blow people. That's just...
Or you're not supposed to admit it.
Yeah, don't ever admit it. Yeah.
And what about one of those, I imagine that Jeffrey Allen Hayes taking his pants off was pretty surprising. But apart from that, one of the most surprising things that's ever, and actually on or off stage.
Most surprising thing. I don't know. I like to put people together in a room and encourage them to be themselves. And pretty much in every show, there's something that I'm just like, what the fuck was that about? Like, I'm trying to think of a really good one. I've had a lot of crazy things happen on stage. I've had a lot of things happen in the audience.
Yeah.
Sometimes people fuck in the back row. I get to hear about that afterwards.
How on earth do you do that?
I don't know. Apparently, I was leaving one show and I was talking to the door person, and they're like, "Girl, you missed it because this whole section back here, it wasn't that crowded, but people were sitting on other people's laps very slowly going."
Oh dear. So I know, aside from the bawdy side of the storytelling, you're in love with storytelling generally.
Yeah.
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 Tell us about that.
Storytelling is just so real, you know. You fall in love with people when they tell you their real shit. And I was a sex party producer, and I was a full-time pervert, and I got to meet so many people who had interesting stories that when I discovered storytelling, the first thing that came to mind was sex. But after this many years, pretty much like within the first year, I was like, I want to know everything there is to know about storytelling. So I really kind of geeked out on it. Donald and I geek out on storytelling sometimes. Last week he called me and we're just like, oh my God, and we'll talk about sometimes the stories that are told on stage, or he's obsessed with screenwriting and I'm obsessed with teaching stories. I teach storytelling workshops, things like that. So it's just one of those things that you just can't help but fall in love with it, because people hear storytelling and then you watch their face light up and you know that they have a story in mind. And you're just like, what just happened? And they're like, whoa. And then they tell you something that is just so real and so true and not planned. Mm-hmm. And it's just so fun for them to go, oh my God, I forgot about this moment in my life. And it's so much fun to watch it come up again. And then the joy of sharing it. I mean, we structure the show so it's not you sitting in the audience, just like file in, sit in your chair, be a good audience member. Next show's coming in, get the fuck out of your chair. Like, that is not what we do. We have extra time at the beginning. We have a game called Bango, which is dirty bingo. So you can walk up to strangers and go, do you have a Tony butt plug in your ass right now? Write your name in that box. And we give you sex toys. We pull prizes, you know, but it's just the best icebreaker, because everybody in the world is just like, you know what, I was at this party last week and I had a pony butt plug in my ass, and the craziest thing, so people start telling each other stories in the audience, you know. And once you get past that, like, you know, you could go somewhere where you go, well, what do you do for a living? And that's the most boring conversation. Nobody cares what you do. Your experience with the pony butt plug last week definitely gets their attention. And you get invited to parties and you meet your new best friends, and it's just, it's not always about sex. It starts with sex. Mm-hmm. And then they're just like, hey, you seem cool. Do you want to go out and have coffee sometime? Or, you know, and people form these very real friendships just because there's time in the show structured for them to talk to each other and tell stories.
Yes. And also, to your point about people don't just sit there, because of the encouragement you give the audience at the beginning and at various points, reminders throughout, a vital thing about telling your story on the stage is the feeling that someone is listening and reacting and you know, responding. And there is such a difference between thinking about your story, planning your story, recording it for you, and then delivering it on stage with this live interaction. And some things that you thought might get a certain reaction do, and other things which you didn't imagine would get any kind of reaction do. And
yeah, I mean, it really starts with, when I tell people to pitch me stories, I'm like, you're just telling them to me. Don't fucking freak yourself out. You're actually more interesting than you think you are. Just tell it to me. You've met me. I'm not scary. And then they go, okay, Dixie, so I've never told anybody this story. And they leave me a recording of them just telling it to me. Because if you say, like if I say, would you like to tell a story on my stage? Somehow I always get a TED Talk, which is just like, I remember, I've always been a sexual being. I often was reprimanded for humping the edge of the couch as a young child. Everybody humped the couch. Everybody. Not interesting. Story is here to hear, not your entire sexual history. So if you just go, here's your thing, just talk to me. It ends up being this story that's just like, great, we can fit that in the time. We can pull out the real moments. Because if you try and do your entire sexual history, you're not going to zoom in close enough to feel what you felt, and smell it and taste it, and all those things are the great elements of story. If you just go, I humped the couch when I was young, and I've always been very sexual, and a lot of sexual things happened to me, and thank you for coming to my TED Talk, then we are engaged by your story. We want to know what you're afraid of.
Yeah.
We want to know what you're excited about. If you could have anything, what would you end up getting? You know, and then they go, I could have anything. And then they just tell you what they really hope. And then you fall in love with that person. You're sitting in the audience going, holy shit, like they actually was real in front of hundreds of people. So you become a rock star.
Yeah.
People who get on my stage become a rock star.
It's true.
Yeah.
And one of the things I struggled with was the true part of it. And you know, you talk about it being real and real moments. Is it fair to say that it's not necessarily like documentary style truth? it's the emotional truth of it.
Say some more about that. What do you mean?
Well, I mean, you know, I don't know how many people in the audience could think of a sexual encounter they had where they could remember it in the kind of detail you might see it laid out and then you want to explore it, you know,
Yeah.
and then they undid this button, and then this happened, and then this happened. And it doesn't need to have that detail, but you sort of have to make it feel like that. It's things may not have necessarily happened in that exact order, but at the end of the day, the story that you've told conveys the truth.
Yeah. Well, that's true, but first that made me think of the fact that a lot of people feel like if there is a sex story that involves them and another person, the other person is going to tell a different story.
Right.
So does that mean my story isn't true?
Yeah.
It's your fucking story. You own your experience. That person can't say, well, actually, that didn't happen for you. I was there. That story for me, you know, I think feelings are so much of what makes something true, you know?
Yeah.
There are the orders that things happened in, but the orders things happened in, I have somebody who's a writer who I would tell a story on stage, and she would go, actually, Dixie, you walked out of the room, you realized you forgot the bottle opener, you came back into the room. I'm like, precision is not interesting. Nobody needs to know that. We need to like pick out the highlights, put them in an order that makes sense. You know, and usually it's an ascending order, so that the best part happens at the climax of the story. And the climax is usually the climax for a story body.
Yes. Yeah. What are the different? Talk us through the sort of when you're talking about the timekeeping.
Yeah. So I start every show with a timekeeper. We have this beautiful woman who gets on stage, and my job, because I've done all the coaching and I've done all the event production and everything like that, her job is to keep everybody on time. Because when you tell a story about sex, you can go for 45 minutes easy. And we don't want them to do that. That's why I have a timekeeper now. So when I start the show, I always start it with having Courtney come up on stage with her 3 signs. And the 3 signs are meant, like comedians use a light. Like when you get the light, it's time to get off the stage. But my storytellers are almost entirely amateurs. They don't know how to use a light. And so I have 3 signs. She sits on the front row. And the first one will say, you know, here's your stories told at body or true, told not read off paper, related to sex, kink, and gender, and told in about 2 minutes. So she has 3 signs to keep you on your 10 minutes. And the first one says, you have 4 minutes left. And then I ask the audience, what do we say at 4 minutes left? And the audience, the people who've been there before will go, please be fucking by that point in your story. And I tell these people that instruction is for the storyteller, that is not for you in the audience. Sometimes y'all do that. Let's not do that. And then the next one will say you have 2 minutes left. I say, what do we say when we have 2 minutes left? And these very normal first-time people are sitting next to people who scream, wipe your dick on the drapes. Like, wrap it up, you know, get your phone number, and the final sign will say goodbye and thanks. And it's just to make everybody know how long they have to pay attention. You know? You're not going to have somebody get up there and go, I humped the couch a lot when I was a kid. It's somebody who's going to tell a very interesting, curated, well-told story in about 10 minutes. You only have to pay attention to that person for 10 minutes. And the only constant in the show is me and the timekeeper. The musical act changes, the storytellers change every single show. So if you came to one show and went, I don't know, I didn't feel like there was enough of that. Sometimes people come to the show and go, I didn't feel there were enough queer women with rainbow-haired mohawks on stage in the show. And I would look at them, and clearly they look like that. I'm like, did you pitch me a story? And they're like, well, no. And I'm like, that's why. Like, it's a duocracy. It's a duocracy. Like, if you get on stage, that group's represented now. But you can't expect other people to do the work. Yeah, so every show is completely different.
We're going to take a little break now. And when we come back, Matt is going to tell us his story. And then we're going to get some feedback from Dixie. And after that, hopefully we'll have a little bit of time for some questions. So thank you very much, everyone. If you can come back here at 10 to 9.
I was done talking.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah,
Yes,